First on BBC One, the BBC News with Peter Sissons.
America's latest mass killing, a gunman's revenge on Atlanta office workers. 9 die and 12 are wounded before the killer commits suicide. A terrorist-style execution in Belfast. Suspicion falls on the IRA. And Tony Blair sees the task in Kosovo for himself and says the war was just. Good evening. America's latest mass killing has claimed the lives of 12 people and given an insight into the mind of a man who wanted to settle a score. Mark Barton killed his family in an Atlanta suburb and then went after workers in 2 firms that he blamed for his financial losses. Later, he shot himself. Amid the shock and grief, calls for more gun control have so far been muted. President Clinton said he wanted to wait until all the facts were known.
After 5 hours on the run from the bloodiest massacre in Atlanta's modern history, Mark Barton killed himself in this van as police closed in. One of his 2 guns fell onto the road. His orgy of killing started at his suburban home on Tuesday, when he bludgeoned his 2nd wife to death. On Wednesday, he murdered his 7-year-old son, Matthew, and then his 12-year-old daughter, Michelle. He left notes expressing love for them on the bodies. On Thursday, the chemist-turned-financial speculator came here where he'd lost thousands of pounds in share gambles. As he opened fire, he said he hoped it wouldn't interfere with trading.
I was the first person to look into his eyes.
And what did you see?
Someone who was very calm and determined. No feelings, no feelings.
Mark Barton's mission of deranged vengeance at the financial centre was clearly expressed in a farewell note read out today by Police Chief Jimmy Mercer.
I don't plan to live very much longer, just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction. And the last sentence states, you should kill me if you can.
Now, police think Barton had killed before in Alabama in 1993, when he was prime suspect in the hacking to death of not only his first wife, but also of his mother-in-law. For the authorities here, the disclosure of the earlier murders has complicated an already confusing picture of the motivation behind Barton's Atlanta shooting massacre.
I don't know if we will ever have any adequate answers. I think it's too simplistic to say that financial losses led Mr. Barton to this killing spree, because of course there's at least suspicion that he was involved in 1993. But ultimately we're simply left with the grim task of trying to bring our city back together and of course grieve for the families and their victims.
For Atlanta, this has been a dreadful month with over 20 killings, most of them involving firearms. The massacre can only intensify the bitter debate across America over tighter gun laws. What happened here yesterday was Southern Gothic horror, blamed on a paranoid loser willing not only to shed the blood of strangers, but also that of vague acquaintances in the financial markets across the road here, and also to take the lives of his loved ones. Brian Barron, BBC News, Atlanta.
Police in Belfast say that the killing of a 22-year-old man who had been missing since Sunday bears all the hallmarks of a terrorist execution. Charles Bennett's body was found on waste ground in the Nationalist Falls Road area. His hands had been tied behind his back and his head covered.
The spectre of terrorist murder returns to the back streets of Belfast. The body of Charles Bennett was found by local people in this car park off the staunchly Republican Falls Road. The 22-year-old's hands had been tied behind his back and a cloth wrapped around his face. He'd been shot in the head. The young Catholic man was last seen on Sunday evening. He clearly didn't think his life was in danger as he left his girlfriend's flat here in North Belfast with someone who'd called at the door. He told her he'd be back in 15 minutes. The police believe he knew the person he left with. Charles Bennett was never seen alive again. The security forces have spent the day searching for clues to identify his killers, but no clear motive has yet been established for what the police have described as a callous and brutal murder.
It has all the indications of a paramilitary-style execution. The fact that he was bound and left in the circumstances that he was left.
Officially, the police say they're keeping an open mind about who carried out the murder, but security sources have indicated they don't believe any of the Republican splinter groups would be capable of this type of killing. The finger of blame is being pointed at Sinn Féin's military wing, the Provisional IRA.
At this time, I want to limit myself to expressing condolences to the family, and until we find out precisely what has happened and the circumstances of this man's death, I don't want to be adding to any of the speculation.
Sinn Féin say they believe the IRA ceasefire is still intact, but that's not a view shared by many unionists or even the Cross-Community Alliance Party. If it's proved the IRA was involved in Charles Bennett's murder, then Sinn Féin's continued role in the peace process will be called into question. Tom Coulter, BBC News, Belfast.
World leaders have ended a conference in Bosnia with a declaration designed to ensure that in future the Balkans stay peaceful. But Serbia, the country that's central to any lasting peace, wasn't invited to the meeting. President Milosevic was urged to embrace democratic change or remain an outcast.
Working closely together was the theme of this Sarajevo conference, to find ways to draw the Balkans into mainstream Europe so that wars like those in Kosovo and Bosnia should never again shake the region's stability.
Yes, today can be a turning point, and we are committed to accelerating the integration of these countries with the structures of the modern Europe. For Bulgaria, for Romania, that means getting down to negotiations and membership. For countries like Macedonia and Albania, it means new agreements which will help them to get easier access to trade, a stronger political dialogue.
But he said no help for President Milosevic's Serbia. It was the same message from Mr. Clinton, greeted at a local school by a bizarre rendition of an American spiritual in Serbo-Croat. The American president, it seemed, had come all the way to Bosnia to talk to the people in next-door Serbia.
I did not involve the United States in Bosnia or in Kosovo to hurt Serbian people. We took a stand for the humanity of all people and against anyone who seeks to use racial, religious, or ethnic differences to promote hatred.
A rare meeting with locals. Elsewhere, streets were empty and security draconian. The people of Sarajevo had been told to stay at home and keep their windows shut. But the point of this summit was the symbolism, and just before leaving, a family photo. The idea of gathering so many world leaders here in one room was to say that never again would the West fail to intervene in the Balkans until it was too late to stop a conflict. The problem is, that's more of a hope than a promise. The one glaring omission here was Serbia, and everyone agrees until that problem's solved, there can be no lasting stability in the Balkans. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The Prime Minister flew straight from the conference in Sarajevo to Kosovo and a meeting with the commander of the International Peacekeeping Force, General Sir Mike Jackson. Later, he met some of the British and American troops serving there.
Tonight, the Prime Minister was flown in by helicopter to the province he had refused to abandon. More than any other NATO leader, he was prepared to go the distance for Kosovo. He was met on the ground by General Sir Mike Jackson, the British commander leading the NATO peacekeepers. Then it was time to shake hands with some of the 10,000 British troops serving here. The Prime Minister told them they had done a good job for this generation in Kosovo and those to come, and this was something to celebrate.
Well, it's a moment of pride because I feel that the cause was just. We now know that thousands of people, innocent people, were killed, were treated with barbarity and brutality here, and yet they've been able now to return to their homes, and it's only because of the work that our troops here have done that's been able to happen, and I think that's big progress for civilization.
This is what the troops face. In the wreckage of the old Kosovo, they're struggling to build a new one, a safe place for both Albanian and Serb. That may never happen.
It's just all totally burnt out.
But the Prime Minister is prepared to spend a long time trying. Today, this was the last patrol for troops from the Parachute Regiment and a guided tour for their replacements in the Royal Irish Regiment.
And then it's really ethnic cleansing in this area. They were told, as I said, at 8 o'clock at night, leave by 6. 2,500 people got up and left.
Hello. Welcome to the kitchen. Right.
This evening, the Prime Minister may hear many accounts like this over dinner in an army tent.
Look, I've just been talking to a Frenchman who said the food was really good. Can't do better than that, can you?
Tonight, the Prime Minister is getting a taste of army life. He overnights in neighbouring Macedonia, but will return here tomorrow morning for a walkabout on the streets. It will be a chance to meet the people he fought to save. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Pristina.
Iraq claims 9 people were killed when British and American aircraft carried out raids in the no-fly zones in both the north and south of the country. The Iraqi news agency quoted a military spokesman as saying 23 people were injured in the attacks. The United States has confirmed that warplanes attacked military targets in the north after they were fired on. Midwives have called for an overhaul of maternity services after a study found thousands of pregnant women were being left without help during labour. An official report seen by the BBC but not yet published found that hospitals all over England were unable to recruit the midwives they needed.
OK, Amanda, if you'd like to just lift up your T-shirt and we'll have a little feel of the baby.
When Amanda Osborne gives birth in 3 weeks' time, she'll be looked after by the midwives who are seeing her now, by professionals she knows and who know her. A few years ago, the politicians promised it would be like this everywhere.
You build up a friendship with the midwives and you get to know their faces, so it's easier to trust them.
But for many other women, it's a very different story. When Natalie went into labour to give birth to Ruby, the staff at her local hospital were strangers, and they were so stretched that for much of the time, they were absent strangers. 1 in 3 hospitals can't provide one-to-one care. In spite of some complications, she was wired up and left alone.
We were left, usually spells for half an hour to each time, and then there was one time when we were left up to 2 hours. When we expressed that we wanted somebody in the room, because of the monitoring and the difficulty that was surrounding the labour, they sent in a student midwife or a student nurse who wasn't able to answer any of our questions.
Hello, Sharon. How are you this afternoon?
Recruiting midwives is the big problem, yet at Trowbridge Community Hospital they have no difficulty finding staff. The difference here is that midwives like Sheila Bedford are in control, looking after women who don't need medical intervention. This type of care was to spread throughout the country, but many schemes have been abandoned as funds have run out. Here, they're convinced this is the right approach.
Working here as a midwife, I'm allowed to work as a midwife completely and use all the skills that I've learnt during my career. And I don't have a lot of the restraints that the other midwives have in some of the other units.
Rick Porter, the obstetrician who covers Trowbridge, is also worried that there are now more deliveries by doctors and fewer by midwives. At the same time, caesarean births have nearly doubled in 10 years.
We're seeing a massive increase in caesarean sections, and at this rate we're going to have the same caesarean section rate of the United States, probably by about 2010, and that doesn't seem to me to be the way we should be going.
The health service is faced by many demands, and the truth is maternity care has slipped as other issues have taken first place.
There are over 50 initiatives to try and modernise the NHS at the moment. It's certainly the case that some of the modernisation that we might like to see in maternity services is going to have to wait until we've made some of those improvements.
The government says it's doing its best to recruit more midwives, but there's no doubt that the high hopes of a few years ago have been dashed, and that the quality service found here is the exception rather than the rule. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
Railtrack is facing the threat of fines running into millions of pounds unless more services run to time. The rail regulator has dismissed the company's proposals for improving performance as completely unacceptable. Railtrack said it would try to make up as much as possible of the shortfall this year. Tony Blair has nominated the Defence Secretary George Robertson to become the next Secretary-General of NATO. The post becomes vacant later this year when Javier Solana leaves to take charge of the EU's foreign policy. Mr. Blair is said to have received a positive response to the nomination from other NATO leaders. There are reports that China is again preparing to stage military exercises in the waters off the island of Taiwan. It follows attempts by Taiwan's President Lee Teng-hui to assert the island's identity separate from mainland China. In 1945, Taiwan was occupied by Chinese forces opposed to communism. They claimed it as the Republic of China. Today, the Chinese government says that the island is a province of China. But with a separate political system and economy, Taiwan claims independence in all but name.
Taiwan's elite marine force shows its muscle on the shores of Jinmun Island, less than 2 miles from mainland China. These special troops are Taiwan's top fighters. In wartime, their mission is to cross the narrow straits and infiltrate enemy lines. With tensions now running high, they're ready for battle. This is the man who sparked the crisis. Taiwan's President Lee told the leadership in Beijing to treat the island as a separate state, not part of a single China. It's a move that reopens old wounds, and it worried the Americans so much they hastily dispatched a special envoy to Taiwan to meet President Lee.
Beijing is angry because they want to impose one China on the present reality, because they want everyone to pretend that China is already united, which is not the case. In our view, there is not one China. China is not one. China is divided.
Last time Beijing wanted to put Taiwan in its place, it fired live missiles into the straits and staged a mock invasion. Now there are fears Taiwan's new assertiveness could provoke a repeat performance. But Taiwan's change in thinking is visible everywhere. Even at school, the next generation is being taught history in a new way, which reflects what its leaders see as a self-evident reality. Taiwan should come first, says their teacher. We'll learn about mainland China afterwards. Ordinary Taiwanese are proud of their symbols of statehood and of being a new democracy. But daily rituals like this can seem hollow when Taiwan, living under the shadow of China, is ignored by the rest of the world.
Taiwan spent the last 50 years developing its own identity, including its own political system. So to many people here, all President Lee has done is stated the obvious. But to Beijing, any declaration of statehood is politically explosive, something unacceptable that could provoke a military response.
Taiwan has made its stand. Now it's nervously preparing for the worst, waiting to see how its powerful big brother on the other side of the straits is going to react. Jill McGivering, BBC News, Taiwan.
Here, the new sports minister, Kate Hoey, has run into controversy on her first day in office. She said Manchester United should think again about its decision to withdraw from next season's FA Cup. Instead, United will play in the World Club Championship in Brazil, a move which it's hoped will help England's chances of staging the 2006 World Cup. United's chairman, Martin Edwards, described the new minister's comments as disgraceful and ill-informed.
Manchester United and their fans arrived in Bristol tonight for a pre-match friendly game, with some doubt lingering over whether they'll be playing in the FA Cup next season. The uncertainty has been created by the new sports minister, who's accused the club of treating their supporters shabbily. She thinks United should be competing in the FA Cup and the World Club Championship in Brazil.
I think it's possible for them to be able to do both. I think Manchester United supporters think it's possible for them to do both. I think everyone in the country thinks it's possible for them to do both. And you know, I hope that the Manchester United board will listen and will look at this again very carefully.
Kate Hoey's views stand in stark contrast to those of her predecessor, who last month backed United's decision to pull out of the FA Cup.
The FA and indeed the government are asking Manchester United and all fans to do their best to enhance England's reputation and standing throughout the football world.
Manchester United say they thought they were supporting government and Football Association policy aimed at improving England's chances of securing the World Cup finals in 2006. Even with their talented squad, they say it's impossible to defend their FA trophy and compete to be the best club in the world. And Kate Hoey's intervention has been described as ill-informed and ludicrous.
For a new sports minister to suddenly enter the arena at this late stage and tell us that we're treating our supporters shabbily and should go back in the FA Cup, I suggest she does her homework properly, and I suggest that the government gets their act together, because we did this in support of the last sports minister.
The Football Association has challenged Kate Hoey to come up with a feasible solution to the problem. A spokesman here said, "We're looking forward to explaining the complexities of the situation to Miss Hoey." Adam Minot, BBC News, at FA headquarters in central London.
Linda Tripp, the woman in whom Monica Lewinsky confided over the telephone during her affair with President Clinton, has been charged with making secret tapes of the conversations. The tapes helped the special prosecutor to impeach the president. The grand jury in Maryland also charged Tripp with illegally disclosing the contents of the tapes. She faces a maximum of 5 years in jail. After months of talk about a looming recession, it seems the British economy is in robust shape. The latest figures show a healthy rate of growth, but that could now lead to pressure for higher interest rates.
In Britain's factories, the gloom is lifting. Manufacturers like this Oxfordshire-based firm making mobile phone equipment are now seeing their order books filling up. 6 months ago, there were real fears that 1999 would bring a recession. Now the latest figures show manufacturing growing for the first time in a year. And at this firm, they've now got the confidence to expand into new buildings.
The end of last year was certainly sluggish, and our confidence was low in terms of our investments that we would be making this year and next year. But over the last 3 to 4 months, that picture has totally changed. We have reintroduced our investment strategy, and we will be taking on another 50 to 100 people over the next 6 to 9 months.
Transport is among the industries enjoying better growth, and this removals firm is now being kept very busy by the bubbling housing market in southeast England. Doubts about job prospects, which made people cautious about moving in the winter, seem to have faded.
The feeling you get where we work and where we live is that things are looking up. I mean, people are spending money, the shops and restaurants are opening, things are looking good.
It's still a mixed picture. In Newcastle, where these homes went on sale recently for 50 pence each, the economy doesn't feel so good. But overall, a new worry is emerging, that Britain may now go on a spending spree, which might have to be curbed with higher interest rates. A whole series of cuts in the cost of borrowing appear to have done the trick and kept Britain out of recession. But as the economy gathers speed, the Bank of England will watch closely for signs of inflation. And experience shows it'll be just as quick to raise interest rates as it was to cut them. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News.
The ban on exporting British beef comes to an end on Sunday after 3 years, but because of expensive new hygiene rules and a lack of demand overseas, it will probably be some time before overseas sales begin to pick up. Our environment correspondent Margaret Gilmore has been to Belgium, where although caterers are welcoming the return of British beef, consumers remain uncertain.
There is a place in Brussels that's like a little part of the UK. Van Engelen specialises in selling British meat. Every day the lamb arrives fresh from UK abattoirs. They want to buy British beef again too, but when the ban's lifted on Sunday, only one abattoir will be ready to supply them. New hygiene rules make exporting beef too expensive.
The cost, they will be very high because they need extra vets and so on and so on. It's not commercial, it will be not commercial. It will take maybe 2 years before it will be commercial.
There is a niche in the European market for British meat. Anita Vizy comes to Van Engelen specially to buy it. These days she buys lamb, but she'd like to buy beef too. Madame Vizy is married to one of Belgium's top chefs. Roger Vizy's been cooking British meat for 40 years. Today it's the lamb his wife's just bought. He believes the quality and cuts of UK meat are invariably good.
British meat is very good, very healthy. It's a high quality. So our customers who need it and who come back to our restaurant, they have always the big and a nice taste of the healthy quality meat.
You want it back?
Yes, of course I want it back. Yes, yes.
But the exclusive eating houses of Europe are a fraction of the market Britain used to have abroad. Convincing caterers to buy beef again is one thing, persuading ordinary consumers will be much more difficult.
In terms of putting beef back into supermarket shelves, that will probably going to take a little bit longer. Over the last 3 years, we've seen a renationalisation of beef markets in Europe, where consumers have tended to buy their own origin. The same thing has occurred in the UK as well. So it's going to take a little bit more time to be able to achieve that.
Even Marks and Spencer's won't sell British beef in its Brussels store. They can't afford to take on extra vets to check beef exports, a condition for lifting the ban. But beef farmers need to sell abroad to make up for losing compensation payments once the ban is lifted. What's happening is not good news for farmers back in the UK. The ban may be lifted, but in reality it could be many years before people here are ready to eat British beef again. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, Brussels.
And the main news tonight, America's latest mass killing has claimed the lives of 12 people. Mark Barton killed his family in an Atlanta suburb and then shot dead 9 office workers before turning his gun on himself. That's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
For the latest news headlines and analysis 24 hours a day, go to BBC News Online at www.bbc.co.uk/news.
Good evening. A former Lambeth care worker has been jailed for 10 years for a catalogue of abuse against children in London and Liverpool. Michael John Carroll worked in Lambeth between 1978 and 1991.
This is no longer a Lambeth children's home, but in the early 1980s, John Carroll sexually abused 2 brothers here, offences which only came to light 2 years ago when Merseyside police were alerted that he'd abused children in a Catholic care home in the northwest as well. Carroll, who left Lambeth in 1991 to run a hotel in Wales, pleaded guilty earlier this month to 35 counts of sexually abusing teenagers in care. In sentencing him, the judge at Liverpool Crown Court told Carroll that his offending was both grave and persistent. The judge said it was hoped that bringing Carroll to court would bring his victims some belated consolation. But one of his victims, who wanted to remain anonymous, told Newsroom South East that wasn't the case.
I've suffered for longer than 10 years. I think it's an appalling 10 years. I don't believe it should have been life.
Prompted in part by his case, Lambeth Council and the Metropolitan Police are now tracing hundreds of former residents of children's homes going back to the 1970s. Mags McKean, Newsroom South East.
The Austrian civil engineering firm convicted over the Heathrow Express tunnel collapse has lost its appeal against a £500,000 fine. The tunnel caved in 5 years ago while the rail link was being built. No one was hurt, but Geoconsult and Surrey-based Balfour Beatty were found guilty of endangering lives. Kent Fire Brigade's warning householders to keep videotapes out of direct sunlight. It follows a blaze in Canterbury in which a wheelchair-bound boy was critically injured. Firefighters say the fire spread so rapidly because of a collection of 100 videotapes in one of the rooms. Now it's the football season's curtain raiser on Sunday at Wembley Stadium. Arsenal face Manchester United in a repeat of last season's Charity Shield, which the Gunners won. But they'll have a tough task against the treble winners, made worse because of the absence of striker Nicolas Anelka.
A note perhaps for Nicolas Anelka from his employers as the Frenchman's colleagues train ahead of Sunday's Charity Shield against Manchester United at Wembley. Interest from the media is high, but one doubts it's much to do with the match.
I don't know the latest, but what is 99% for sure now, he will not play for us anymore.
So, no sign of Nicolas and a disturbing lack of Englishmen, meaning more work for Englishman Martin Keogh.
It is a worry that so many foreign players come in and effectively take jobs away from English players.
If Arsenal beat their arch-rivals on Sunday, I doubt too many Arsenal fans will bemoan the lack of English talent. Geraint Hughes, Newsroom South East.
And that's it. Join us tomorrow for our sports bulletin at 5:20. From us, there. Very
good evening to you. It looks like July has turned out to be quite a warm month and quite a sunny month
for England and Wales, and we have our figures. Mostly warm and dry, and in fact the driest July, hopefully, since 1984. We're not quite to the end of the month, and certainly the sunniest since 1990. And it's been sunny today for a large part of Britain. There have been bits and pieces of cloud, more especially North Sea coasts of northern England and eastern Scotland really have been quite bad with that low cloud drifting in. The cloud you see in the south, high-level cloud, and it hasn't stopped temperatures in London reaching 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And in general, over the next couple of days, it is going to feel very uncomfortable because the humidity is increasing. We keep those kind of temperatures, and it stays generally quite hot. So those are our figures for tomorrow. Similar figures to today, but perhaps a bit cooler near the coast with those sea breezes setting in, a bit more cloud coming into some of those more western areas. But it stays quite hot all the way through to the end of the weekend. It only starts to cool down as we move through Tuesday and Wednesday, and the reason for that, we start to see a freshening easterly breeze bring cooler air in off the North Sea through Wednesday and Thursday. Not much of a breeze for the start of Cowes Week. In fact, sea breezes developing through the afternoon, coming in at a force 3 or a 4, so not a lot of wind. And some of our other events across Britain through the weekend, well, certainly some showers likely in Dublin for the golf, and also perhaps a rogue thunderstorm turning up for the cricket in Leicester. Gatscombe Park for the horses is fine and hot, and we're going to see some sunshine, I think, for the motorcycling down at Brands Hatch. Now, for the outlook a little bit further ahead through to Monday, you'll see there's more of those shower symbols, and there's likely to be more of those big showers developing as we move into Monday and Tuesday. Bits and pieces of cloud for the overnight period, quite misty, a little low cloud coming and going, and a mild night as well. Temperatures in the range of 11 to 18 degrees. We do have this weather system trying to come through for the weekend. That's going to bring some showery outbreaks of rain into western areas through tomorrow, more especially those showers creeping a little bit further east as we move into Sunday. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a good weekend.